act, but it's more than basic. It's a portion of his rap, but the core is ancient. It's supported like a pack of some more observations are important, like the fact that we're bored of fake shit. More creative, have the floor, so take it. Travel to the door is a normal placement. Tattoos on my arm.
So, guys, we as human beings, we experience the world through patterns. We see patterns through our eyes, and we repeat patterns through our actions. And you can call them habits, you can call them cycles, you can call them this, call them that. But the fact of the matter is, it's just how we're hardwired. And last podcast, I recognized a pattern in myself that I determined was possibly not good. All right? And that got me thinking, what other patterns do I have that are maybe positive or maybe indifferent? And it got me thinking about nature patterns in general. And I determined that we do patterns that we're familiar with because it makes us feel safe. And when we feel safe in a pattern, we're more likely to repeat that pattern than not repeat that pattern. Just because it's safe, regardless if it's good or bad. And I use this to my advantage all the time. For example, I recognized right away in this podcast that it was more important to be familiar than to be good. So every time I come in here, I talk to my friends on a little monologue, and the dear listener knows the monologue is finished when I say, you're listening to Tattoo with Children. Which is what you're listening to, Tattoo with Children. I am your host, Flavor Ray in Seat A. Across from me in Seat B is the Dread Pirate Benjamin. And across from us both is newly minted barbecue aficionado, CIO Payne. Newly minted because we just ate barbecue, and I'm happy as fuck.
Listen, I think your name hasn't meant anything until now. Because you just got like God's helping of flavor.
Oh my God, people. I was just about to start the podcast. If you follow me on TikTok, I do a 15-second mic check every time I record just to let everybody know I'm about to do something. Today I didn't do the mic check. I did a motherfucking brisket check because there was brisket just laid out on the table. And that's what I did instead of mic check. I ate brisket. I'm feeling so good, people. You don't even know.
I think they have some idea.
They got some ideas.
They can hear the change in your voice.
It's in my voice.
I'm wondering if we need to start every podcast with brisket.
Well, that'd be like trying to start every day with sex, and that just makes you tired.
All right.
You know, it was like I can do it. It's because I love it so much, I overindulge. Like I got meat sweats right now, you know.
So scale of 1 to 10, what would you say that brisket was at?
That brisket was about a good solid 8, actually.
Okay.
Like he did a really good job.
Yeah.
I mean, like this guy's not new to barbecuing.
Right.
He's not new to smoking, but he's new to just doing his own thing.
Right.
And so he wasn't quite sure about everything, this, that, and the other, a little bit of spice here, too much salt there, a little bit of smoke here. So he was not sure about it. His next one is going to be absolutely godly. Like this one was very, very good. Better than anything you can find in this town. His next one is going to just blow the fucking roof off the place.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty amazing. I mean,
it was absolutely amazing.
I don't eat a whole lot of brisket unless it's brought to me.
Mm-hmm.
But Hunter Hale knocked it out of the park. He did a very, very good job for still being in a creative / learning mode.
Yes.
Because when you're in that mode, I mean that's one of the interesting things. That's a creative learning mode is a very different type of pattern than when you're feeling confident about what you do.
Right. Yeah, what he's trying to do now is establish a pattern. Okay? Like his pattern is not established on how he makes this product. And so he's trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And when he figures out what works and what doesn't, that will be a part of his regular pattern, and that pattern will be positive.
Right.
Because he will do it the same way every time and get awesome results every time.
Yeah, I would say out of if I were, I'm a big believer in the creative / learning process. I would say he's at like step 3 of 10, and so for you to say like he's at an 8 right now, the great thing about that is that means he can put these tiny little tweaks in steps 4 through 10. Okay.
Exactly.
In other words, he's not trying to figure out how the entire brisket gets cooked. He's not trying to figure out how he's trying to work the nuances of 30 minutes here, of 11 degrees temperature there.
Exactly.
Of, a dash more salt. Not much.
Not a whole lot.
I mean, it was so well done.
I could taste where his effort was and the things he figured out. Like I knew he had figured out his barbecue pit before he started. Mm-hmm. I knew that he had figured out the level of smoke in the pit before he started. And he did something which normally you don't see, where he did not actually trim off the entire top of the point, which guys, if you know brisket, the point is the fat cap on portion with on top of the deckle muscle. Like, that doesn't mean anything to most of you, but it's just a meat term. He didn't trim that down to get bark on. A lot of people trim that down so that they get that really dark color on top of it where the seasoning is. He actually got that dark color on top of it with that fat cap intact on top of it.
That's impressive.
Which was, yes, that's very impressive. That's extremely impressive. And so, like, this kid, he's way ahead of the game as far as the learning process is concerned. He doesn't have far to go at all.
Most people think in order to get that bark, you need to have a direct heat.
Yes.
And it's not true, right? But it does require a certain amount of work involved to get it without the direct heat.
Yeah. You gotta, he talked about, he thinks he wants to shorten his smoke time a little bit. He wants to increase the smoke inside the pit a little bit and shorten the smoke time to make it springier. He had some tweaks that he saw right away he wanted to make. And he's just ahead of the game, man. Like, his next one's going to be better than this one, and what that is going to be better than that one. Like, he's real well on the right track, and that's kind of tracks are kind of what I want to talk about, because like I recognized, talking about in the previous podcast, I recognized that the track I was on with thinking about 38 studios and shilling and all that. Like, that was a bad track because it doesn't help anything. It was a bad track because it's a stone that weighs that can weigh you down. So it's a good idea to get out of that habit of doing things like that. Like, hating anything is a bad habit, and a habit is just another pattern. Okay, it's just repeating the same cycle to get the same result. Like, when I read about 38 Studios, I get mad at Curt Schilling. And so, what you should do is either stop reading about 38 Studios, get that out of your head, or change the way you feel about Curt Schilling's Ray. And so, that's something that I recognized. And recognizing our patterns is the first step toward changing a pattern that we think may be harmful. So first thing we got to do is determine what is a pattern. So I'm going to ask Mike over here to go ahead and give me a dictionary definition of the word pattern, okay? Because to me, a pattern is when we recognize a certain set of information data sets as being something that we're familiar with.
Okay.
As being familiar. What do you think?
Sure. There's actually 11 different definitions.
Right, yeah, there's
pattern.
not dress pattern
Okay.
or anything like that.
The ones most applicable to what we're talking about would be a discernible, coherent system based upon the intended interrelationship of component parts.
Okay, so that's like a system.
A system.
Yeah.
Or potentially another definition, frequent or widespread incidents. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Frequent or widespread incidents. Okay, so in other words, one thing happens, and then another thing happens, and they're all similar, and so you're recognizing a pattern there. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then this one is also the only one I think really applies. A reliable sample of traits, acts, tendencies, or other observable characteristics of a person, group, or institution.
Okay.
Behavioral patterns, spending patterns, prevailing pattern of speech.
Yeah. I'm not sure which one. I think those are all fairly high level. Like, which one is the pattern for? Like, is the definition for when, like, say you see a face in a piece of toast?
An artistic, musical, literary, or mechanical design or form.
Okay, a design, right? A design that you can recognize, that is familiar.
I think that's a pretty important point, right? Because the word design denotes a creator.
Yes.
It denotes something that doesn't occur coincidentally.
It does occur coincidentally. Like, it's not something that is a natural outgrowth. Whereas our pattern recognition is a natural outgrowth. Like this happened because out in the wild, back when we were fighting wolves for dominance, we had to be able to recognize patterns. You had to be able to know when things were going bad or when things were going good and be able to react accordingly. And so it's hardwired into us to be able to recognize certain features, be able to recognize when the wind blows this direction, then it's more likely it's going to be cold than the next day. Things that were important to our survival are hardwired into us to be able to recognize. And so we tend to do that naturally. When we see a person that is of our familiar group, then we tend to be more relaxed around that person. It's the reason why different races have a certain amount of tension at first, just because it's okay, I have to either fit you into my new pattern as good or fit your new pattern as bad. I don't know which one to fit you into yet, and so there's going to be a little tension while I figure it out. But if you are already recognized as a familiar pattern, then I can just automatically shunt you into the track going towards positive. So black people tend to be a little bit more relaxed around other black people. White people can be more relaxed around white people. Asians are more relaxed around Asians. And because we say, okay, we've all experienced a common experience. We all have a common set of patterns already. Let's see if it holds true. And so, you go up to them, you have a certain handshake or a certain way of speaking, something that establishes that we are now into the right set of patterns to be positive.
So I want to challenge you to be very now. One of the patterns I've noticed is on this podcast, because you and I tend to speak what isn't spoken. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in other words, when you and I are around people who may have tendencies towards racism,
right?
You and I speak it out loud.
Right.
But one of the patterns that I've noticed is that with the three of us specifically, more me and you, because we have a little bit different style of communication than CIO Payne does, is that we label things. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I'm wondering if our pattern of labeling white people, black people, brown people, is that actually a good thing? So let's talk about the specific pattern real quick. No, I don't want to. I'm not trying to hijack. But what I'm getting at is, it's been brought to my attention that, several times we've discussed racism, and you and I have a very different take on it than most folk.
Sure.
But I think that one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, are we helping the problem? Okay, by defining this, because it's fine to have a conversation about it. We both agree that the conversation is actually very important.
Right.
But is our pattern or habit of saying, well, that guy's white and that guy's black, is that actually a good thing? Because they're human.
I would like it better to be able to identify it in a different way. Like I don't know if you still I didn't really want to say white people, black people, Asian, but I don't know a simpler, more direct way of denoting I'm not really talking about race. I'm talking about tribe. I'm talking about whatever group you're in. Like if you or tattooed people. I could have said that. Said if you, or smokers. You see a guy smoking on the side of the road, and you are also a smoker, then that you may go up to that guy and say, "Hey, man, can I borrow a cigarette?" And he can say yes or no, but it's now established that the two of you share a pattern, right?
We have some sort of common ground.
You have a common ground, and you have a common familiarity already.
I kind of want to draw the difference here in what you were saying, because I was kind of on the same wavelength as Pirate Ben. When you were describing the idea that these different you were using color of skin as a differentiator, right, in the description, but what you were to me describing was the fact that when you are around people that come from the same culture,
sure,
or a culture you're familiar with, you're more relaxed. It just so happens that we have this tendency to assume that another white person is going to have the same culture as me, a white person.
Right. So we automatically, like, we in other words, we're relying on our pattern that we've established to cut out the work necessary to get to know if that person's good or bad.
The interesting thing about what Mike's bringing up, though, and I think you're getting to it just with different words, is I think what I'm describing is that you and I have we need to break a habit. Okay? And the habit we need to break it is not in the labeling or the classifying of white or black people. That label is true.
Sure.
Okay? But true doesn't always mean helpful.
Right.
So, interestingly enough, what Mike brought up is the easiest pattern that we could see is skin color.
Right.
But actually, you're describing something much deeper.
Yes, describing culture.
You're describing, but what culture? Because I'm a pretty smart guy.
I was describing culture in general.
Right.
I was going for a generalized cultural landscape. Like when you're in a culture, and I was trying to establish something to use an example of something that people recognize right away. Like, one of the things that people recognize right away is skin color. And it's a visceral response. The other thing that people recognize right away is sex. People like to be able to say, "Oh, this is a man, this is a woman," because then it's not because they actually care if it's a man or a woman, but their pattern recognition in their brain has a certain reaction to it immediately.
But if we're going to evolve, which is to say, we're going to get better.
Correct.
Then, and that we can go to the science of that one on a different day.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But if we're going to get better, then my argument is that for the purpose of furthering the conversation, wouldn't it be good for you and I if we started identifying, okay, I see the he there, but that's easy.
Yeah.
I see the black there,
Yeah.
but that's third grade.
Yeah, I agree.
I see the class there, but in sixth grade I got out of that.
Right.
So now I'm going to help my brain file this in a new category, which is not based on things learned in grade school.
Right. And this is like what you're doing now is laying out a course of advancement for me and you. Because
I'm not. I have nothing to say to the listener now, because right now you and I are still in the throes of the conversation.
Right. Yeah. So this is like that's why I was like, listener, this may not be something that you can actually get behind right now. I don't want to force you into it. Okay, like in other words, I absolutely see Ben's point, and I absolutely want to have a conversation about it. But a lot of you do not see Ben's point. And I want to recognize that too. It's not because that you are a bad person or less intelligent than me. You just haven't talked about race as much as me and Ben have together. Okay? And if you have, then you're on board. If you haven't, then you're not on board, and that's fine. You see what I'm saying, listener? I do not want to leave you behind in this conversation. I think this may be the most important conversation I have.
But what's interesting is that I appreciate and respect the desire you have to not leave the listener behind. But here's the interesting thing. Much like a... We're going to take a short break.
Yeah, we're going to take a short break here for the dogs.
Everybody dancing, dog. Yell on that X. I'm a sentinel. Standing tall. No time to stand still. Please don't be dog. They're throwing jazz at me. To challenge my rap savvy. I sway like Callaway. I'm ahead. You'll never catch me. Ain't worry about it unless I speak.
We're back with Tattoo with Children, guys. You are joining our conversation about patterns here. Now, Ben was just about to illustrate his point more for the listener, I believe. That was where you're headed towards, Ben?
Yeah, but also for you and I, because I respect your desire to not leave the listener behind. But in this particular case, because you and I haven't done the work yet, okay, we can't actually include the listener. And in the sense of it would be disingenuous to include the listener. And here's how. If you imagine the scene from the 2000 hit comedy, The Ladies' Man, with Tim Meadows.
Oh, we're back to Tim Meadows. Remember him, guys? If you go to my Twitter, I got a whole link to his entire IMDb on there.
So there's a very important scene in that film where in front of Tiffany Thiessen, I don't know if anyone remembers her.
Oh, I remember Tiffany Thiessen. I remember her a lot, often.
In front of Tiffany Thiessen, Will Ferrell is on he's on a little bit of a kick, shall we say, of getting himself all lubed up and ready. and then grappling with other lubed up and ready men in the form of wrestling.
Wrestling, yes.
So the point that I'm making is that he, in that moment, can only take on one other wet, oily body. Okay, and he's not able to include all the watchers. So in this particular case, I think you're Will Ferrell.
See,
and you're grappling.
I fucking hate that I knew where he was going with this. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop him, people. I wanted to so bad. I was laughing too hard to say, shut the fuck up, Ben. No, we're not going to go with the wet, oily men analogy here.
A part of the problem is how good the brisket was earlier, and I think we've all washed our hands like 3 times, and we still got like brisket juice, like in between our fingers.
That is true. My fingers are all sticky right now with the brisket.
But the point that I'm making is actually legitimate.
It is legitimate
because you're working with a very... You're attempting to pull yourself out of old patterns, out of old habits.
Sure.
And so you're saying through words, which are very poor pointers at times,
Sure.
You're saying, hey, I want to be better. I want to work out, and I want to be stronger. What are you working out? Your mind? What are you working out? Your heart? What are you working out? Your soul?
Right.
You want to be bigger.
Yeah, I'm doing soul work so that I can do more things.
The problem is you're working with a very slippery topic here.
Yeah, no, this is a very slippery topic. And like, dude, I could be early on this topic, but my whole if I were to wait until my patterns are more evolved, I don't know when I can have this conversation.
Correct.
And I don't know that we actually have that kind of leeway to have this conversation. Like this, like I believe the reason why this is coming up is because I'm starting to see that much of the non-conversation, like this whole podcast is really about how few conversations that we have. Like we don't have enough conversations in our society. I'm not talking about just American society. I'm talking about European society. I'm talking about African society. I'm talking about Australian society. I'm talking about Chinese society. We don't have enough talking going on currently. We have a lot of available patterns that have been established for a long time that we're following. Mm-hmm. You know, and so the effect of that is we are tending to not listen to one another. We're tending to simply follow the pattern that everyone else is following. So when you talk on, when we talk to on a topic such as politics in England, then people start to fall into camps immediately. You know, for Brexit, against Brexit. You know, for what Princess Meghan and what's the other one? Who's the other new princess?
Yeah, I don't really pay attention.
Yeah, like you know, there are all these camps forming all the time over every subject, and the two sides never talk. Like they never speak. They just repeat the same thing over and over again in this endless pattern. And the thing about it is I can't go out and say, hey, guys, this pattern is bad, because I don't actually know. You know, maybe this princess is a terrible person. You may have figured that part out. But I can't have a wide enough conversation to figure out if that's true or not. And it's happening over and over again. So I want to talk about patterns, and it is a slippery topic, and it does fall into things like race and homophobia and sexuality.
Sexuality.
And it's going to fall into relationships, and then it's going to fall into marriage, and it's going to fall into child rearing. And
religion.
We're going to hit all of them. That's the reason why I say this may be the most important thing. This may be the only thing we talk about from this point forward. Mm-hmm. But I recognize that I'm not doing everything right. I recognize that I also have my own negative. This whole started with me finding a negative pattern in myself. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to wait to fix it. Mm-hmm. I want to dialogue with it continually. Like I want to dialogue on the podcast and after the podcast. I want to keep talking about it. And before the podcast, I want to talk about it some more. Like I want to get better every time until eventually we are getting better together. That's my actual goal.
And I think one of the flaws, though, specifically in our relationship that I can see, that's me and you, is that we've taken a great deal of time waiting for someone to join us.
Yeah.
And I think in the imagery that I played with earlier, what I'm trying to say is that we can't actually afford to do that. In other words, you have to go ahead and wrestle me.
Yeah.
I have to go ahead and fight back. We have to, I think you and I, and again, it might be because of the time we were born. Uh-huh. It might be because of the things that happened around that time, the things that the nature and the nurture that grew us, in other words. But the reality is we still have to, okay, this is what we haven't wanted to do. Uh-huh. You and I specifically.
Sure.
We've wanted to wait for an audience to do this in front of. And my argument now is that you and I, whether anyone's watching or not, we're just going to have to go ahead and choose. We're going to have to wrestle. We're going to have to get it out of our system,
right? Whether
anyone's watching or not.
I think that we do.
That's the only way to change society, though. The pattern is everyone's waiting on someone to change it for them, and they don't realize that they're part of it.
So are you wanting to do that? So you want to do that over the mics? What you're saying? Because we do this all the time.
I think we need to move more to doing it over the mics because you and I do this.
I'm open to that.
You're correct. We do it, but we don't let the listener in on it because it's pretty messy.
Yeah, it's an ugly process.
Like I call you names sometimes.
Yeah.
Like you hit things sometimes.
Yeah.
Like you hurt yourself. Like punching, an immovable object. And I'm like, Ray, if you keep doing
Don't
that,
break your
you're
hand.
going to break your hand.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, I just have all this emotion. And I'm like, well, you're a stupid motherfucker too. But I don't know why that's coming up. And we do, but we don't show that to people very often because we want to show them a completed product.
Yeah. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do have a tendency to want to polish it before I present it.
Yeah, I'm going to quote Sturgill Simpson here. I mean, if you want the crown, come and get it. It's right up here on Ship Mountain with me. But that's where we have to start, man. We have to start in the mud.
There ain't no sense in polishing a turd there, Flavor Ray.
No sense polishing a turd. I disagree. If you polish a turd that's old enough, that's a diamond.
That's probably not true. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
That is science, motherfucker. All right, so
I can't contest that. I'm the worst scientist.
In other words, dear listener, look, this is a naughty subject, okay? But I do see Ben's point that we have a lot of work to do. And it could be that we have to do that work. I'm not against that. I'm not against you getting in on this fucked up process. But at the same time, I don't want you waiting on me. Like I don't want you waiting to hear how me and Ben attack the problem before you attack the problem.
I have a question.
I want you attacking the problem too.
I have a question.
Sure.
The this whole conversation started with the assumptions behind that we all tend to make, right?
Sure.
Your skin is this color, so if you see somebody with a similar skin color, you're making the assumption that they grew up in a similar enough culture where you'll have some common ground.
Sure.
Right? Is the assumption the problem?
The assumption is the problem in the sense that it could be wrong. Like in other words, assumptions are only a problem if they're wrong. If the assumption is correct, then assumption is not a problem. It's actually a shortcut.
Right.
We're gonna have to work with that for a minute.
In a problem solving sense. In a bigger philosophical sense, assumptions are always a problem because it's assuming information that you don't have.
So, for instance, I think if the three of us walk into a village, any village, anywhere, but I just said walk, so I'm assuming that there are either paths or roads. And I also assume, by the way, that village is not approachable by vehicle, otherwise we would have ridden.
Sure. We're walking into a village.
I think the issue comes up, the problem that comes up with an assumption is that we assume, that as three men in 2019,
sure,
we will not be attacked.
Okay.
That we will be considered friends, that we operate in a fairly safe society, okay? And that's all we've known for 40 years. So my argument is that the assumption is wrong from the get-go.
Okay, I mean, which is fine too. Like I said, it's only a real problem if it's incorrect. If we assume that we're not going to be attacked, walk into the village or not attacked, we didn't actually have a problem.
They're really excited over there.
Yeah, they are.
They must really like what we're saying.
So, dude, my parents, I got to go pee right now, so you motherfuckers need to let me out. You ever need to stop talking and start letting the dogs pee.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
we're going to take a short break here for a second.
Doesn't matter if you're cooler, hottest in the cortisol, president or lose a box. Doesn't matter if you're cooler, hottest in the cortisol, president or lose a box.
Having said that, we're back to Tattoo with Children. Having said what I just said about assumptions only being a problem if they're wrong, there is a bigger philosophical problem with assumptions in that when you make them, then you are cutting off the avenue of figuring out the information yourself. In other words, even if the assumption is correct, it is more correct, it is better to get the information directly through a conversation or through some sort of direct experience. See, is like Ben's point is really one of the ones I wanted to make at the very beginning. That when we follow our patterns, even when those patterns are positive, even those patterns help in the short run to solve an immediate issue or get past an immediate crisis or get you down the street faster, it's still not a substitute for actual experience. The actual experience of getting to know a situation, getting to know a person, having an actual conversation. Okay, so we should not be substituting pattern recognition and pattern following for living. Does that make any sense, people?
So even if you make an assumption, right, you can't put the results of that assumption on a shelf and leave it there forever. You still have to dig into the details of it.
Well, even if I come to you, okay, and you and I talk all the time, Mike, and I see Mike there, and he's smiling and he's happy, I can assume that Mike had a good experience and he's smiling and happy. But I'm not going to approach you as if that assumption is true. I'm going to say, hey, Mike, how's your day going? And then I want you to tell me.
Right.
And you tell me with a smile on your face, hey, my day is going shitty. My wife hates me. You see? Like, I'm not substituting my pattern recognition, even though it has to occur. See, that's the other part about it. We can't stop the pattern recognition.
We can't stop it, but I think we can inform it.
Yes.
In other words, I believe everything you just said is the cause of most of our problems.
Yes.
So, in other words, your pattern recognition failed you.
Yes.
Because you made about 17 assumptions.
Uh-huh.
First of all, you made the assumption that you were seeing another human and not a hologram.
Or a figment of my imagination.
We're all holograms.
Secondly, you made the assumption that the countenance of Mike's face had to do with his mood.
Right.
His feelings, his intuition, his very being.
Right.
I mean, I don't even know if I can list the amount of assumptions there.
Yeah. You can't. It's all pattern recognition.
So it would have been better if your pattern recognition had informed you, interesting, it appears you're about to interact with another human being.
Yeah.
And you don't know very much. You don't have very much information.
No, you don't have any information at all.
So this is the fascinating thing about characters like Sherlock Holmes. Okay? Because Sherlock Holmes assumed very little. He did interpret patterns.
Yes.
But he didn't assume that things like appearance played much role in that.
Right.
That the person he had met on November 2nd of 1963 was the same person he would get to interact with on November 22nd of 1963. A very important day to me, by the way.
Even that the person that he was talking to was a person and not a dog in a person's suit.
Correct.
Like, and these are all things that are obviously high-level skills in using pattern recognition by dismissing your instinctual pattern recognition. The things that because our instinctual pattern recognitions are not necessarily there to help us problem solve. They're there to make us feel comfortable. They're there to make us feel safe.
Like they're there to help us survive.
Well, they're there to help us survive, but also there to help to keep us going, so that we don't run the other direction.
This is a big big deal. What Pirate Ben just said about homes. When you read the books, especially, you see an intentional replacement of assumption with detailed observation.
Yes.
Okay. The pattern recognition.
Detailed observation.
The pattern recognition is a result of the observations.
Yes.
That's the direction it goes, right? Versus what we tend to do naturally, right? Which is recognize patterns to form assumptions.
In other words, if you were to liken it to a array of information, our arrays today, most people, 99% of the people, our arrays are full of information. Whereas a Holmesian person, his array is emptied of information. And he uses his eyes, ears, touch, and other observational tools to fill in the array in the situation that he is in, recognize the pattern, make a deduction based on the analysis of the pattern, and then put the true deduction into a permanent area of another area, so we can empty out all the information that they just analyzed and have a blank array again.
And I think that's one of the things that I've discussed in the past about kids. It's one of the reasons I like dealing with kids so much.
Children do that very easily when they're under the age of 3.
Because they don't carry around with them all these assumptions.
Yes.
So, in other words, when I hang out with my bestie, Frankie, what happens is that I have to prove once again that I'm a decent person.
Yes.
I have to prove once again that I'm Ben.
You have to prove once again that you are in existence and not just a figment of our imagination, not just a lucid dream.
Right. I have to prove once again that I will, in fact, provide food that her mother does not approve of.
Right.
That I will provide situations that her mother does not approve of. And that I will use a variety of language that most adults do not approve of.
What I love, I remember one of your best interactions with Frankie was when you gave her a pair of shoes that you designed for her. You painted them. And she's like, "Oh, these shoes are great." And so she got those shoes, took them home, and she loved them. And next time she saw you, she said, "Hey, where are my shoes?"
Yeah.
You know, that's perfect.
Yeah, I was the shoe guy.
You were the shoe guy. So if you're truly who you say you are, you have shoes.
Right. You
don't
more.
have shoes, then I don't know that you even are a person I should talk to anymore.
Well, and since then, she has considered me a motherfucking liar.
Right.
Because I have not since provided more shoes.
Yeah.
So when I see her, I'm like, "Hey, Frankie, what's up?" She's like, "Now." And that's no.
She's still waiting on the shoe guy to show back up
right.
again.
She wants to know where the fucking shoes are. It's fantastic because it's like I created a pattern that brought her a great sense of happiness. She's apparently into sneakers also.
Yeah, which is great.
And so she loves that shit. And so she's like, "Hey, you did something that took my day from like a 3, to an 11 out of 10. I had a great time. I would like you to do that again." And every time I'm like, "No."
Here's the thing, guys. When we have adults who do this, who do this thing that Frankie does, those adults become great people in our society. Like, we consider them history-making people. Einstein was like this. Okay, the great genius of Einstein was not his intelligence. And he was the first one to tell you that he wasn't that smart. He wasn't even that good at math. The great thing about Einstein was that he never assumed he knew anything about the universe based on anything. He kept with an empty array, going and observing and then trying to make deductions. And when he couldn't make deductions, he decided to theorize. Not theorize, that's the wrong word. He decided to hypothesize. And so his hypotheses would go into a different set of circumstances. And then he would make observations to test his hypothesis. and so on and so forth until he began to figure things out. But he never stopped asking those basic childlike questions from the moment he was born to the day that he died. Like honestly, he died believing that all of his observations were probably wrong. Like he said, this is probably, like, all of this is probably incorrect.
But the interesting thing about that is, so we can gather information from that, right? But what I'm curious about is why none of us do what he did.
I think because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to empty out our full arrays. It's very difficult to take all of our information that have led to assumptions that are panned out 20,000 times. Like, we've made the assumption and it worked. It made the assumption and it worked. Made the assumption and it worked. Made the assumption and it worked. And we do that over and over and over again until we think that our assumption is something that we've tested. We think that it was a hypothesis.
That came out true.
They came out true, and it's not. It's just a pattern. So that's all it is.
So it didn't actually work.
It didn't work at all.
Okay.
Because you never, it didn't work because you never actually tested it. You just followed. That's what I'm getting at, guys. If you're living, then you are out there making observations, making deductions, making hypotheses, testing that with experience, and then trying to come to truth in every situation. Yes, it means that you're questioning all the time, but it also means that you're conversing all the time. You say, well, I will spend all my day in that case talking with people and gathering. Yes, that's exactly what you would spend all your day doing, forever, until you die. And that's the way I think, in my experience, that is the best way of actually living. Because when I don't do that, when I don't have conversations and get true information, my life is demonstrably, to me, worse than if I just follow patterns. Okay, and from my general observations of other modes of society, I think, and I'm not sure, it was the reason I'm having the conversation. I think possibly in a hypothesis that other people are having the same problem on a grand scale.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's true because everyone's doing the same thing you're doing. I mean, everyone's doing the same thing I'm doing. And I think part of it is, too, that we're just a little slow.
Sure.
To recognize that it's not working.
I would agree. I would agree with that to a large extent. I think that a lot of people would disagree with me that they haven't had conversations. I think a lot of people think they have had conversations. They'll say that they've talked about Joe Biden. They'll say they've talked about the hunger crisis. They'll say they've talked about, how to fix the prison system in America. They've talked about how to fix healthcare. And I have been absorbing huge amounts of information about these subjects and all other subjects over the last 20 years. I think I've absorbed more information in the last 20 years than I had in the 20 years before, by probably 10 times. And I have not seen one single conversation about any of those subjects that I've asked. I haven't seen one, I haven't heard one, I haven't had one. One conversation, people, not a single one. Like, I believe that we have been attempting to talk about race and racism in this country, America, for at least 400 years and never done it one time.
Can I point out an observation that I've made?
Sure.
Earlier in this podcast, a word was used that our audience might need a definition for.
Sure, go ahead.
Countenance.
Okay.
Look or an expression, face or visage, bearing or expression that offers approval or sanction. I only give the definition because I needed it. But I want to point out, my observation is that Pirate Ben used this fucking word.
Right.
And he's the same exact person who can't formulate
where the Mongolians live.
And Mongolians and where they're from.
He can't understand.
No need to hypothesize. No need to develop a theory
directions.
or whatever. It's just an observation.
But that's actually a good idea. What he did, though, he was like, listen, Mongolians could be in Nepal. Mongolians could be in Africa. They don't have to be in Mongolia. Maybe you're talking about the Mongolians of Mars. Like he just did not make the assumption. He did the exact thing that we're saying that people should do, or at least attempt to do. You know, it just seems silly on the surface if you use the pattern rules of English. But no, I'm very proud that Ben used the word countenance. You know,
it's a good word
with his limited. Like you said
I'm
another
proud.
word.
I'm proud that he used it. I'm also proud that he used it correctly.
He used it correctly, and I would have been even prouder if he used the word visage.
That's just
visage would have been
that's
awesome.
Just a badass word.
Like that would have gotten Power Ben an extra few points.
We should have
on the podcast.
We should have a system. We should have like stars and stuff, and Pirate Ben gets a gold star when he uses a new word.
I wholeheartedly support this notion.
I'm going to go buy a board with gold stars. Over here.
The issue is that I've read so much that there are very few words. I just don't retain any of them because I'm hanging out with Frankie, you know, and
right.
So I'm just like rock, board, hit, tree. You know, like
that would be even funnier if it wasn't true. He is absolutely just like that.
Yeah. Well,
what do I need today? Meat.
Yeah. I recorded about an 8-minute conversation between me and Frankie the other day, and it's crazy to me. Like, so if you and Frankie hung out,
yeah,
okay, and I recorded that conversation, right? She would use like 3 words, okay, because she doesn't know you very well,
right.
But what's crazy to me is that she'll use 3 words with everyone in the room, and then me and her will go like away from people, not out of the room, but away from people, and I'll record like a conversation the two of us have.
And she's talking in paragraphs.
And her vocabulary is massive.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, you know, I'll be like, hey, so hand me the Phillips head screwdriver. And she'll hand me something. I'm like, this isn't the Phillips head screwdriver. And she'll be like, I know, but it's the one I wanted to give you. And I'm just like, that's a complete sentence. You just said a complete sentence. Like, that's amazing. And then, like, somebody else will come back in the room. Like, David will walk back in the room, and he'll be like, hey, do you have a screwdriver? And she'll be like, stick.
Right.
Holding up the screwdriver.
Right.
All right, let's hang on 1 second so I can put the dogs up.
Okay, yeah, we'll hang on a second.
My name ain't Mikey, but yeah, I rock. You know why? Because I don't give a fuck. That's why.
So, guys, you're back with Tattoo with Children. This was a very good beginning to this discussion, and it is my belief that this discussion, in particular, will be a theme, a running theme, for probably the life of the podcast, because being able to A, recognize a pattern, B, determine if that pattern is positive or negative, and C, being able to then change a pattern are probably the 3 skills most necessary to advancing yourself and society. Like, I don't think there's anything more important. Like, even if things are going perfectly well, even if you believe as a person that your life and lives of everyone that you know and lives of everyone that you could possibly think to know are going exactly as they should, the ability to recognize a pattern, determine for yourself, not by any other information, determine for yourself if that is good or bad, and then change it actively if necessary, are the 3 skills necessary to living life in general. And I think that these are 3 skills that are the least practiced currently in society and in personal lives. Like, I'm willing to be wrong, guys. You got to understand that too. So I'm not saying that this is how it is. I'm not saying that this is how your life is. I'm saying this is how my life is. But I am saying that if we don't talk about it, we're never going to know. And if we don't know, I don't know if we're going to be headed into a ditch or not. and I don't want to run it into a ditch. And by it, I mean all of us. Okay? I mean society, I mean humanity, I mean the planet. You get it? You know, I'm not trying to say that I'm going to save the world, but I'm saying that if the world needs to be saved, we're not even going to know about it until it's too late if we don't start having conversations. Does that make sense to you guys out there in internet land? Germany, Canada, Lufkin,
New Zealand.
Do we actually have people from New Zealand listening?
We've had some downloads from New Zealand.
I love you, Kiwis.
The thing I was thinking about to kind of reinforce the point is we don't want to make any assumptions about what the audience gets out of this particular recording.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. So I would encourage anybody who can to drop us a line on the Tattoo with Children Twitter or Instagram or even the Facebook and tell us, what did you get out of this podcast?
Mm-hmm. I absolutely encourage you to do that, and the place you can do that would be at Tattoo with Children on Facebook. You can do it at Tattoo with Children on Instagram, or you can do it at Tattooed With on Twitter. All of those three of those are very well checked, and I respond as quickly as I possibly can to those things. And I'll do it on air. Okay, so you ask me a question, I will try and answer it over the mic as many times as I can. You can find me personally at Madara Shadow on IG, and you can find me personally at Hunter Vanguard on Twitter. That's Hunter Vanguard, all one word. You can contact Pirate Ben at Black Crow Brother on Instagram and at Black Spot Tattoo Company on Instagram. You can find Mike Payne, CIO Payne, at CIO Payne on Instagram, and you can find him at Payne.points on Instagram. That is Payne spelled Payne. All right, guys, we're gonna keep pushing on with the work that God has given us, and hope to see you along for the ride.
Peace.
Love you guys.
We were born to bring it back, but it's more than basic. It's a portion of its rap at the core is ancient. It's supported like a pack of some more observations are important, like the fact that we're bored of fake shit. More creative, have the floor, so take it. Travel to the Taurus